The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, nestled among bills and catalogs on the hallway floor. The envelope was heavy, thick parchment, and bore the name of a solicitor's office in London, not a place Ethan Morgan had ever heard of. He almost tossed it aside with the rest of the Morning Post, but something about the old-fashioned typeface made him pause. He opened it slowly, using his thumb to slide the flap open rather than tearing it. He had no idea that what he was about to read would append the quiet, controlled life he had built for himself over the last 10 years. Dear Mr. Morgan, we regret to inform you of the passing of your half-brother, Thomas Aldridge, who named you as executor and beneficiary of his estate. His final will and testament contains a unique and binding condition which we are instructed to disclose to you in full. Ethan stopped reading for a moment, the name catching in his throat like a stone. Thomas. It had been nearly 2 decades since they'd last spoken. A single awkward Christmas lunch after their father's funeral. Half-brothers they may have been, but brothers they were not. Their lives had gone in different directions entirely. Thomas, the charming and sociable one, had stayed in the South, surrounded by friends and laughter. Ethan had moved north to Yorkshire, where the wind was sharp and the neighbors didn't ask questions. He worked with his hands, kept his own company, and preferred it that way. He continued reading, slower now. As a condition of inheriting the full estate, including property, savings, and personal effects, you are required to enter into a lawful marriage with Miss Clara Rose Whittaker, known associate of the deceased. The marriage must take place within 30 days of your receipt of this notice. Ethan set the letter down. Marry a woman he had never met? Was this some sort of joke? The solicitor's number was at the bottom of the page. He phoned immediately, still in his dressing gown, heart thudding in his chest. A composed woman answered, confirmed his identity, and explained in a soft, professional tone that the will was indeed legitimate, and so was the clause. Mr. Aldridge was very clear in his instructions, she said. Miss Whittaker is aware of the arrangement and has agreed to it, provided you do as well. Ethan nearly laughed, except nothing about it was funny. His half-brother had spent most of his life pretending Ethan didn't exist. Why now in death was he trying to play matchmaker? He barely slept that night. The wind howled against the stone walls of his cottage, and Ethan stared at the ceiling long after the embers in the fireplace had gone cold. By morning, he'd read the letter 3 more times and pored over the attached documents. Details of Thomas's modest but well-kept estate in the Lake District, bank account balances, personal letters, and a photograph. The photo showed a woman standing beside a garden gate, one hand resting on the curved top rail. She wore a floral dress and held a book in the other hand, her head tilted slightly as if someone had called her name just before the shutter clicked. She didn't look like the kind of woman who would agree to marry a stranger for money. And that only made things more complicated. The following week passed in a blur of decision-making. Ethan drove to the solicitor's office, signed forms with shaking hands, and asked every sensible question he could think of. What if he refused? He'd forfeit the entire estate. Could he meet her first? Yes, but it must be discreet. Thomas had requested no delays. What kind of woman agrees to a marriage like this? One with her own reasons, was the quiet answer. It was absurd, outrageous. Yet there was something strangely honorable about it, too. Ethan could have ignored the will, thrown it in the bin, and walked away. But something inside him, perhaps a loyalty he didn't know he still had, told him to honor it. Maybe it was the weight of knowing his brother had chosen him. After all these years of silence, maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the woman in the photograph. And so, with a signature and a quiet word to the solicitor, Ethan Morgan agreed to marry Clara Rose Whittaker, a woman he'd never met, in memory of a brother he never truly knew. Ethan arrived at the tea shop 10 minutes early. It was a small place tucked just off the main high street in Ambleside, quiet and unassuming, with hanging baskets full of petunias and white lace curtains in the windows. The kind of place where old friends met for cream scones and whispered gossip. Not the kind of place to meet a woman you were supposed to marry, not under these circumstances. He stood outside for a moment, one hand still on the car door, heart thudding in a way that surprised him. At 47, he wasn't. A nervous man, life had made him practical, steady. He'd buried both parents, lost friends, and spent years alone without complaint. But now, in the still air of this summer morning, he found himself wondering what in God's name he was doing. He pushed open the door, the little bell above giving a soft jingle. She was already there. Clara Rose Whittaker. She stood as he entered, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ethan froze. She looked nothing like he'd imagined. Not cold, not cunning, not desperate. Instead, there was a quiet strength about her, a woman used to carrying things alone. She wore a navy cardigan over a pale blue dress, and her hair was pinned back in a simple twist. No jewelry, no fuss. Just calm dignity. Mr. Morgan? She asked gently, her voice smooth and clear. He nodded, then cleared his throat. Ethan, please. She gestured to the chair opposite hers. Clara, it's nice to meet you at last. They sat. For a moment, neither spoke. A waitress came over and poured tea without asking, as though she already knew it was needed. Clara stirred hers thoughtfully. I wasn't sure you'd agree to meet, she said finally. Neither was I, Ethan admitted, but here we are. A small smile touched her lips. Indeed. He studied her then, more openly. She didn't fidget or glance around. She held herself with quiet composure, her hands resting on the teacup as though she had done this 100 times before. And yet, there was something behind her eyes, a hint of sorrow perhaps, or weariness. You knew Thomas well? He asked. She nodded. For about 6 years, I worked in the village library. He came in one day asking about a gardening book, and we started talking. We were friends. Just friends? She looked up at him without flinching. Yes, good ones. He was kind to me, when kindness was rare. Ethan nodded slowly, unsure what to say next. I didn't ask for this, Clara said softly. And I imagine neither did you. But Thomas. He always said you were a man of your word, that if you made a promise, you kept it. He glanced away, caught off guard by the comment. Thomas had said that? I didn't know he thought that about me. Well, she said gently, he did. Outside, the wind stirred the flowers in their baskets. Inside, two near strangers sat with shared silence between them, bound not by affection, but by a man who had meant something different to each of them. Still, something had shifted. Ethan had expected discomfort, perhaps even resentment. Instead, he found quiet understanding and a woman who looked nothing like what he'd feared. The marriage was quiet. No flowers, no friends, no music. Just a signature on a certificate, 2 witnesses from the solicitor's office, and the exchange of rings they both admitted weren't really needed. Clara wore a simple cream dress and a soft smile. Ethan wore his one good blazer and tried not to look like a man walking into something he didn't understand. When they stepped out of the registrar's office, the sun was already sinking behind the trees, and the air had taken on that golden hush of late summer. Clara turned to him, not with expectation, but with calm acceptance. Shall we go home, then? She asked. Home. That word echoed in Ethan's mind longer than it should have. They moved into the cottage near Windermere, part of Thomas's estate, left to them as a shared home. It was an old place with ivy up the walls and creaky floorboards. That spoke in the night. The kitchen smelled faintly of thyme, and a kettle lived on the stove like it belonged there. It felt like it had been waiting for someone. Their days found a rhythm, not romantic, not yet, but quietly companionable. Clara rose early, made proper tea, never bags, always loose leaves, and kept fresh bread in the kitchen. She took over the small garden out back, turning over the soil and pruning back the wild roses. Ethan, unsure of where to place himself, fixed what was broken: a leaking tap, the stiff door hinges, a cracked window pane in the sitting room. His hands, long used to hard work, found peace in small repairs. They spoke in bits and pieces. "Did you always live in the North?" she asked one evening over supper. "Since my 20s, he replied. "I like the quiet. Still do." "You strike me as someone who keeps to himself." He gave a soft chuckle. "That obvious?" she smiled. "Only a little." Their evenings were the slowest part of the day. Clara would read by the fireplace, sometimes aloud if the story was good enough. Ethan, unsure what to do with himself, listened quietly, sipping tea or oiling tools that didn't need it. He found her voice soothing, not just the words, but the way she said them. Thoughtfully, like she considered every sentence before it left her mouth. One night, after a chapter from an old countryside memoir, she looked up at him and said, "You don't have to try so hard, you know." Ethan blinked. "Pardon?" "To be polite. To keep your distance. I'm not expecting anything of you, Ethan. This arrangement isn't a trap. I'm just trying to make a home where we both feel safe." That silenced him. He didn't know what to say to a kindness that asked for nothing in return. The days grew shorter. Leaves turned gold and amber along the lane, and geese began flying low across the sky in wide, lazy V's. They didn't speak of love. Not yet? But there was something settling between them, not romance, but something gentler. Trust. And in Ethan's quiet, careful way, he began to realize that maybe this strange life he'd stepped into didn't feel quite so strange anymore. By October, the cottage felt lived in. There were logs stacked by the fire again, jars of jam cooling on the windowsill, and muddy boots in the hallway, 2 pairs now, side by side. The place had a rhythm, not rushed or rehearsed, just steady. Ethan and Clara moved around each other like old clock hands, never colliding, always ticking in quiet harmony. And yet, something in the air had shifted. It began in the smallest of ways. One morning, Ethan found a scarf draped over the back of the chair he used every evening. It was soft and warm, hand-knitted in a deep plum color. Clara said nothing about it, but he noticed her glancing his way when he wrapped it around his neck before going out to the shed. Another time, he fixed the broken leg on her favorite armchair, the one she read in after tea. She ran her hand over the new screws, nodded once, and said softly, "Thank you. No one's ever fixed things for me before." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. So he said nothing, but he kept fixing things anyway. There were 2 people who didn't speak much about feelings, not from pride, but from old habit. Yet each day brought small exchanges that left lasting impressions. One quiet evening, as rain pattered against the roof, Clara surprised him by asking, "Do you miss him?" Ethan didn't need to ask who she meant. He stirred his tea, watching the steam curl. "I don't know if I ever really knew him," he admitted. "We shared a father, not a childhood, not much else." She nodded, understanding without judgment. "He used to talk about you now and then," she said. "Never in long stories, just little things. Said you built things with your hands, said you didn't like fuss. Said he thought he'd ruined it between you both, but didn't know how to fix it." Ethan looked at her for a long time. "Why tell me that now?" "Because I think he hoped this house, this arrangement, might give you both a second chance. Even if he couldn't be here to see it through." Ethan swallowed hard. There were few things in life he regretted, but letting the years pass without speaking to Thomas. That stuck with him more than he liked to admit. Later that week, Clara's past came quietly into the room without knocking. It was just after lunch. She was at the sink, washing dishes, when she paused, her hand still in the soapy water. "Did you ever wonder why I agreed to this?" she asked suddenly. Ethan, sitting at the table with a crossword, looked up. "Often." She turned, drying her hands slowly on a tea towel. "I was engaged once," she began, voice steady. "Long time ago. He was kind at first. Until he wasn't. When he left, he took everything. My savings, my sense of self, even some of my friends. I rebuilt, but not for romance, just for peace." She gave a faint smile, almost apologetic. "When Thomas mentioned you in his will, I didn't think I'd go through with it, but I trusted him, and I didn't want to be alone forever. Not really." Ethan watched her, something heavy pressing in his chest. "You thought marrying a stranger was better than being alone?" "No," she said gently. "I thought maybe marrying you wasn't as strange as it sounded." There was a silence between them then. Not awkward, just full. Ethan stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "I don't know what I'm supposed to be to you," he said finally. "A husband in name? A friend? Something in between?" Clara joined him at the window, standing just beside but not quite touching. "You don't have to be anything right away," she said. "But maybe we could just be kind to each other. That might be a good place to start." He nodded slowly. Kindness wasn't grand or romantic, but it was honest, and it felt safe. That night, he found her scarf waiting for him again, neatly folded on the banister. He didn't need to ask why. He wore it the next morning without a word, but he noticed her smile when he came in from the cold. The walls around them were old stone, but inside, something warmer had begun to settle. Not love, not yet, but something close. The peace they had built together was like the surface of the lake, still and soft, with only the faintest ripples. Life in the cottage had taken on a rhythm so natural, it felt as if it had always been so. Clara in the garden with her gloves and watering can. Ethan in the shed with wood and tools. Shared dinners, evening walks, cups of tea by the fire. Neither of them said the word love, but they had stopped calling it the arrangement. And yet, peace never lasts untouched. It was a Wednesday morning when the first crack appeared. A letter arrived, just like the one that had started all this. Only this one came with a name Ethan hadn't heard in years, Simon Reed. Clara opened the envelope while Ethan made coffee. He noticed her hand still, eyes scanning the page once. Twice. She folded it slowly, slid it into her cardigan pocket, and forced a smile. "Just something from an old friend," she said. He nodded, not pressing. But something in her tone didn't sit right. It was too casual, too light, and Clara wasn't a woman who faked her ease. The next few days felt quieter. Clara seemed distracted. She left the house more often, saying she needed to pick up herbs or visit the post office. Each time, she was gone longer than usual, and when she came back, she looked tired behind the eyes. Ethan didn't ask. Though he wanted to, old habits die hard, and one of his was silence in the face of doubt. The breaking point came on a rainy Saturday, when Clara left her phone on the table and a message flashed across the screen. "Simon, I'm back in town. I want to talk. You owe me that." Ethan didn't mean to see it. He was just clearing the table. But once he did, it sat in his mind like a stone in his shoe. He didn't mention it straight away. He didn't want to seem possessive or worse, insecure. They hadn't made promises, not of that kind. Still, He couldn't help the twisting in his gut. That evening, he said it plainly, not accusingly, but quietly. Is there something you want to tell me, Clara? She looked up from her book. The firelight caught her face in half shadow. After a long pause, she closed the book and set it aside. Yes, she said softly. I should have told you days ago. She took a breath, steadying herself. Simon was the man I was once engaged to. The one I mentioned before. Ethan sat straighter. He's the one who, yes, who left when things got difficult, who made a mess of things and walked away. He waited. He found out about the will, she continued. About us. He's back in the village, says he wants to talk. Says he's changed. Ethan stared at the fire. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I told him I'm married, she added quickly, that I'm not looking for anything, but I think part of me wanted to hear him say sorry. Properly, this time, just once. Ethan turned to her then, voice low and firm. You don't owe him that, Clara blinked. Don't I? No. He stood, not angrily, but with quiet purpose. You owe yourself peace. That's not something he gets to hand out like an apology. She looked down, hands clasped tightly in her lap. You're right, she whispered. It's just sometimes. The past knocks on the door, and it's hard not to answer. Ethan nodded, understanding more than he wanted to. Later that night, neither of them slept well. Rain tapped against the windows like unwelcome thoughts, and the old floorboards creaked with the weight of feelings unspoken. In the dark, Ethan stood at the bedroom door, watching her sleep, curled up with her back to him. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her, to ask her to choose him, not because of a will or duty or comfort, but because she wanted to. But idn single quotes t. Not yet, because even love, when it begins, needs patience. Asterisk. The following days passed in a haze of autumn mist and quiet tension. The cottage by Windermere, once a sanctuary, now felt fragile, like a glass ornament teetering on the edge of a shelf. Neither Ethan nor Clara spoke much about Simon Reed, but his presence lingered like a shadow stretching across their shared space. Clara kept herself busy, tending to the garden with an almost desperate focus, while Ethan buried himself in fixing a creaky staircase banister. The simple routines kept the unspoken worries at bay, but did little to soothe the ache in their hearts. One crisp morning, after frost had kissed the edges of the window panes, Ethan found Clara sitting on the worn wooden bench outside, wrapped in her plum scarf, the one he had come to associate with quiet moments between them. Her gaze was fixed on the distant hills, blue and sharp against the pale sky. He sat beside her, careful not to startle. For a while, they simply watched the world wake up around them, the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a bird filling the silence. Have you decided? Ethan asked gently, breaking the quiet. Clara turned to him, eyes steady but vulnerable. Yes, she said softly, I have. Ethan waited. I told Simon I wouldn't meet him, that I'm married now. That chapter is closed. Relief softened Ethan's features, but he said nothing, sensing the gravity behind her words. It wasn't easy, Clara continued, letting go of what I thought might have been. Sometimes the past feels like a safe harbor, even when the waters aren't calm. But this, what we have now, it feels more real, more honest. Her hand brushed against his, tentative but sure. Ethan took it, warmth blooming between them like the first flame of a fire. That evening, over a simple supper of stew and crusty bread, they talked more openly than they had in weeks. Clara shared stories from her childhood days spent reading by the fire, her mother's gentle hands teaching her to sew, and the laughter that once filled her small family home. Ethan listened, imagining the girl Clara must have been dreaming, quietly in the corners of life before hardship settled in. Then, when the fire had burned low and the clock ticked softly in the background, Ethan shared his own story. He spoke of his father's silence, the heavy weight of being the other son, and the loneliness that had followed him like a shadow. For the first time, he let the words fall without defense. Raw and unpolished. Clara reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "We've both carried burdens," she said gently. "But maybe now we can set some down together." Days turned to weeks, and the cold bite of November settled over the countryside. Yet inside the cottage, a new warmth was growing. They fell into easy companionship mornings spent sharing cups of tea, afternoons wandering the bracken-strewn hills, and evenings by the fire, where silence was no longer empty but filled with quiet contentment. Ethan found himself watching Clara with new eyes, not as the woman he was obliged to marry, but as someone he cared for deeply. Her laughter, rare and soft, became a treasure. Her gentle spirit, her resilience, a quiet inspiration. And Clara, in turn, saw in Ethan a steadfastness she had never known she needed, a safe place to rest her weary heart. One evening, as the first snowflakes drifted lazily past the window, Ethan stood in the doorway to the sitting room, watching Clara arrange wildflowers in a simple vase. The firelight caught the delicate curve of her smile, and something inside him shifted. He stepped
forward, voice low. "Clara."
She looked up, eyes bright with surprise and something else, a hopeful tenderness. "I don't know what the future holds," he said carefully, "but I want to find out with you. Not because I have to, but because I want to." Clara's breath caught. The years of guardedness softened in that moment, and she rose to meet him. "Neither do I," she whispered, "but I'd like that very much." That night, as snow blanketed the world outside in quiet white, they sat together by the fire, hands entwined, hearts cautiously open. The will that had forced their marriage was no longer a chain, but a bridge, one that led from strangers to something tender and true. And as the flames flickered and danced, Ethan and Clara knew they had begun something precious, something worth the wait, the struggle and the unexpected turns that had brought them here. Winter had settled deeply across the Lake District, frosting the edges of the trees and softening the hills into gentle mounds of white. Inside the cottage, the air was warm with the scent of burning wood and simmering stew. Life had settled into a comforting routine for Ethan and Clara, their days marked by small, shared moments and growing understanding. Yet, beneath the calm surface, new challenges were quietly stirring. It began with a letter. One cold afternoon, as the wind rattled the windows, a neatly folded envelope arrived from a solicitor's office in London. Ethan opened it carefully, his fingers stiff from the chill. The letter was brief but clear, a claim against Thomas's estate, questioning the validity of the will and the conditions within it. The sender was an unfamiliar name, a distant relative who had recently appeared, seemingly intent on disputing what Thomas had left behind. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest as he read. The estate was the fragile thread holding their lives together, the cottage, the savings, even the small personal treasures Thomas had cherished. If this claim succeeded, it could undo everything. He showed the letter to Clara that evening, their faces lit by the flickering firelight. "What will we do?" she asked quietly, voice trembling with worry. Ethan took her hand, steadying himself even as doubt gnawed at him. "We'll face it. Together." The weeks that followed tested them more than either had expected. Lawyers' letters arrived regularly, demanding documents and signatures. Meetings with solicitors left Ethan drained, his usual calm replaced by a low simmer of frustration and fatigue. Clara, too, was affected. The lightness in her eyes dimmed as uncertainty crept in. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting in town, Ethan returned home to find Clara sitting by the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. He sat beside her, squeezing her hand gently. "So am I," he said honestly, "but we've come this far. We won't let this tear us apart." Their shared fear became a bond, something raw and real between them. They talked late into the nights, planning, reassuring, leaning on each other in ways they hadn't before. Outside the walls of their cottage, the village stirred with gossip and speculation. Some neighbors whispered about the sudden arrival of the mysterious claimant. Others wondered what would happen if the estate was lost. The familiar faces they had come to trust seemed more distant, and Clara felt the old ache of loneliness return. One day, as she walked through the market square, a voice called out, "Miss Whittaker." She turned to see Mrs. Cartwright, an elderly neighbor with sharp eyes and a kindly smile. "I hear things are difficult," Mrs. Cartwright said gently. "You and Mr. Morgan are doing well, though, I hope?" Clara nodded, grateful for the kindness. "We all face storms," the woman said, "but strong roots keep the tree standing. You two have that, I think." Clara smiled, feeling a small flicker of hope dot back at the cottage. Ethan noticed the change in Clara, too. Despite the strain, she remained a pillar of quiet strength, organizing their affairs, tending the garden, and keeping the home warm with her presence. He admired her more each day, the woman who had once been a stranger, now the heart of his world. One evening, as snow fell thick outside, Ethan found Clara in the sitting room, reading an old book aloud. The fire cast dancing shadows on her face, and he felt a swell of affection he could no longer hide. "Clara," he said softly, coming to sit beside her, "whatever happens, I want you to know ... you're not alone. Not now. Not ever." She looked up, eyes glistening. "Neither are you, Ethan." The claim against the will lingered like a storm on the horizon, but inside their home, a different kind of warmth was growing, one born from shared trials and quiet resilience. They were no longer just bound by a strange marriage clause, or the legacy of a man they barely knew. They were something more, a partnership built not on convenience or obligation, but on trust, respect, and the beginnings of love. The first hints of spring stirred the Lake District as the long winter began to fade. Pale crocuses pushed through the melting snow, and the air was thick with the scent of earth waking after its long rest. In the little cottage by the lake, a quiet transformation was unfolding, one far deeper than the thawing of frost. For weeks, the dispute over Thomas's will had cast a shadow over Ethan and Clara's lives. The distant relative's claim had been strong, supported by sharp lawyers and legal technicalities. But slowly, the truth of Thomas's wishes became clear. His careful planning, his hopes for a new family forged in unexpected ways, could not be undone by cold legal arguments. One bright morning, a letter arrived that both Ethan and Clara held with trembling hands. The claim had been withdrawn. The estate, this home, the land, the memories belonged to them. Ethan stood by the window, looking out over the lake shimmering under a clear blue sky. Clara's hand found his, warm and steady. "We did it," she whispered. He smiled, squeezing her fingers. "No," he replied softly. "We did it. This victory was more than legal. It was a testament to the strength they had found in each other." That afternoon, the village seemed to glow with a softer light. Neighbors stopped by with congratulations and warm smiles, welcoming the couple not just as residents, but as part of the community's heart. For Ethan and Clara, the triumph marked the beginning of something new, no longer defined by a stranger's will, but by their own choices. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Ethan and Clara sat together on the porch. The garden was blooming, daffodils nodding gently, the scent of jasmine curling in the cool air. Clara leaned against Ethan's shoulder, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Do you remember the day we married?" she asked softly. He chuckled. How could I forget? Quietest wedding in history. She smiled. It feels like a lifetime ago. They sat in comfortable silence, the world around them hushed and kind. Ethan, Clara said suddenly, turning to face him. Yes? I never thought I'd find this. She gestured around the cottage, the land, the life they were building. Together. Me neither, he admitted. But I'm glad we did. She reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead. We don't need grand promises or declarations. Just this each day choosing to be here with each other. He took her hand, his voice steady and sure. I choose you, Clara, every day. Her eyes glistened, filled with quiet joy and something deeper. Hope. The cottage, once a house of obligation, had become a home of love, a place where two people, brought together by fate and the unexpected, had forged a bond stronger than either could have imagined. As night settled softly over the lake, Ethan and Clara sat together by the fire, their hands intertwined, hearts open. They were no longer strangers bound by a will. They were partners in life's quiet, beautiful journey, and in that shared warmth they found not just a future, but a beginning.